what's happening across the globe, because we're seeing two different kinds of approaches at play. On the one side, you've got the Narendra Modi kind of approach, which is lock the whole country down, prevention is better than cure. And on the other side, you've got people like the Brazilian President Bolsonaro, who's saying, this is no big deal, we'll ride it out, we don't want to shut the country down, because if we did, the cure would be worse than the disease itself, and therefore it's not acceptable. At this moment, the India Today Data Intelligence Unit did some analysis. There are 42 countries of the world. The red that you see is where there's a complete lockdown. The yellow that you see on this map is where there is a partial lockdown. So in 42 countries at this time, 2.2 billion people are under lockdown. 2.2 billion people across the world under lockdown at this time. I want to show you this report we put together on the true contrarian approaches in dealing with the coronavirus. Take a look.
The pandemic is accelerating. It took 67 days from the first reported case to reach the first 100,000 cases. 11 days for the second 100,000 cases. And just 4 days for the third 100,000 cases.
In Brazil, the number of cases has risen to 2,201, with 46 deaths across the country. But even as stringent lockdowns are placed by many countries battling COVID-19, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro is marching to a different beat to tackle the virus. Now, President Bolsonaro took aim at the hysteria over coronavirus.
O sustento das famílias deve ser preservado. Devemos, sim, voltar à normalidade. Algumas poucas autoridades, estaduais e municipais, devem abandonar o conceito de terra arrasada, a proibição de transportes, o fechamento de comércio e o confinamento em massa.
In the past few days, the Brazilian president has come under severe criticism for not doing enough. At a time when most countries are trying to control the virus with lockdowns and preventing it from going from stage 2, which is the known chain of transmission, to stage 3, the unknown chain of transmission, the Brazilian president is not the only one to think otherwise. It took President Donald Trump months to realize the gravity of the situation and put in emergency measures.
You don't want to see panic because there's no reason to be panicked about. But when I mentioned the flu, I said, actually, I asked the various doctors, I said, is this just like flu? Because people die from the flu. And this is very unusual. And it is a little bit different, but in some ways it's easier and in some ways it's a little bit tougher. But we have it so well under control. I mean, we really have done a very good job. I've always known this is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. I think now it's in almost 120 countries all over the world.
In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been following a zigzag pattern while handling the pandemic. Initially, UK had been following a no lockdown, no control policy, followed by the UK Prime Minister's U-turn on Monday night when he ordered a UK-wide lockdown.
To ram that point home, the more effectively we follow the advice that we are given, the faster this country will stage both a medical and an economic recovery in full.
Around the world, the debate is largely over. It has to be a lockdown to break the chain. And with China and then Italy as role models, the basic information on how to go about it is already in place.
कोई नहीं है मतलब? Okay, so that's the message that's going out. Two completely contrarian approaches. Now you don't know which of these approaches will actually lead to a country being safe at the end. But you know, if you speak to any epidemiologist, any virologist, they'll tell you what we try and capture in this chart that we put together. If you allow for people to move from one place to another, what happens just came up on your screen from one, it spreads to more people, then it spreads to even more people, and then to some more, till it just becomes like a massive spiral. And if you intend to stay home, then you can very quickly reduce the spread of the disease. You can't eliminate it, but if one person stays at home, they don't go to malls, they don't take domestic flights, then you can very clearly see in that animation that we've compiled that it's much easier than it would be if everyone just is traveling non-stop. Okay, so now to look at these two approaches, the Narendra Modi approach versus the approach followed by some world leaders like the Brazilian president, to some extent by Donald Trump as well. I'm joined on this broadcast by Dr. Ratin Roy. He's one of India's foremost economists. With us also on this broadcast is Mihir Sharma. He's an author and an analyst. GVL Narasimha Rao represents the Bharatiya Janata Party. I want to go across to Mihir first. Mihir, you've been quite critical about the manner in which the lockdown's been implemented. We've seen a completely contrarian approach being adopted by the Brazilian president. Donald Trump says by Easter he hopes America is back on its feet. They're congregating in churches. What is your specific problem with the manner in which the Narendra Modi government has gone about implementing this lockdown? Mihir.
I think that the first thing to note is that the differences from, for example, the last big decision that they took, which was demonetization, here there was no need for secrecy, there was no need for surprise. It could have been planned openly and coherently to begin with, taking into confidence or publicly discussing matters with chief ministers, with all the various stakeholders, bringing the private sector on board. You didn't need this sense of a last minute, pulling together all these disparate issues. This was not something that you needed secrecy for. You could have done it well in advance.
You're saying you could have done it well in advance, but the reality is the situation also, Mihir, is constantly evolving. I want to go across to Dr. Ratin Roy. You've been seeing the manner in which the lockdown's been implemented. What do you think is right about the manner in which we've gone about implementing this lockdown, Dr. Roy? What do you think is wrong in the manner in which we've done this lockdown? How could it have been done better? Ratin Roy.
I don't think that question can be uniformly answered across India. I can give you a calibration now. I was working on it. I think this lockdown and in fact the general measures have been extremely well implemented in Kerala, Karnataka, Telangana. They've been joined by Andhra, Rajasthan, and in UP somewhat bizarrely, it depends on which district you're talking about, right? I think the lockdown is being badly implemented in Maharashtra. Haryana was bad, but I can see it coming up and stepping up to the plate now, but the problem remains Delhi. In Delhi, we have seen three problems: coercion, lack of credible information, and delays in communication. Very simply put, citizens in Delhi, including myself, simply do not know when we can go somewhere to buy some food without the chance of getting beaten up or threatened. And this is not acceptable. Delhi, unlike Gujarat, unlike Haryana, has failed to ensure that at least to get the elites out of the way by ensuring that online delivery of food, etc., starts to work so that the administration can then focus its energies and attention on people who are vulnerable. So my call is, I have no grounds with how the country as a whole is responding. I'm saying the response is uneven, and I'm very disappointed that in the national capital, it is as bad as it is.
Okay, GVL, respond to the point that Mihir Sharma makes, that this is not something which is an immediate crisis. It's been building for a while. Even if a lockdown had to be done, it could have been done better so that people would have been well stocked, instead of creating post-8 p.m. crisis with long queues and suddenly sending people in panic. He says, like the government did demonetization, you went for the dramatic big move and people in the end had to scramble for their supplies. Respond to that, GVL.
No, Rahul, I think this had to be done in this manner, in my opinion, because had we announced this a week ago, that we are going to announce this lockdown after 3 weeks, then people who can afford to stock up a lot of supplies would have bought for the next 6 months. And that would have actually led to a huge shortages in the market. I think giving time, because people who can afford will buy everything for 3 months or 6 months. And that would have actually deprived the poor on the others who only who can buy supplies for a day or a couple of days or a week or so. I think the government was doing whatever it can do at the back end. A lot of preparations had happened even before the final announcement had been made. Even in the first address to the nation, Honorable Prime Minister gave a hint. He said, I may come back to you and ask you for a few weeks of cooperation. And the government already had this in its mind. A lot of back channel activities were going on. A lot of preparatory work was afoot. But a public announcement had to be done in this manner, because otherwise this could have actually led to a scarce scenario. It would have actually led to a scary scenario.
Mayor Sharma, respond to that there were enough hints in the Prime Minister's address. I'll come back to you. I may need a few weeks. If people were listening in, reading between the lines, they had a good sense of what's coming. In any case, he had to mobilize the machine. States had to go in for a lockdown. All that happened. It didn't happen suddenly. It actually happened in a gradual fashion with first there were 75 districts, then the other states joined in. It happened gradually. Respond to GVL Narasimha Rao. Mayor Sharma.
Well, I think that one of the, there's a slight contradiction here. Was there a warning handed out by the Prime Minister, or was it a surprise? I think Mr. Narasimha Rao is saying both those things. One of those can't be true. But the fact remains, and this is very simple, that if there has been back channel work in laying the groundwork for keeping supply chains open, for ensuring that people who are migrants can get back home, for ensuring that people who are elderly in every community can be taken care of, if that back channel work has in fact been going on, where are the results? People are walking, home 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers. There is no clear thinking as to how this has to be sorted out, or at least it hasn't been conveyed to the public. I'm not quite certain that this has been planned as well as I think Mr. Narasimha Rao would like us to believe.
Respond to that, because there have been reports from Delhi, from Mumbai, that migrant workers are actually having to walk back home. There were people from Delhi walking back to Bulandshahr in Mumbai as well, because this caught them off guard, because there were no trains, no buses, they have no money, no income, they have no savings, they don't know what to do. They have to go back to their village because they can't do anything. They need to now walk back. One person we interviewed was a cycle rickshaw wala who says he's cycling back to Bihar. Can you believe that? He's cycling back to Bihar because he doesn't know what to do. He has no way of surviving in the city. That's the point that Mayor is making. Respond to that, GVL.
No, Rahul, I think it's given the kind of a situation that we are in, you see, it is not like people are going home for Diwali or for Chhath Puja. I think if you allow everyone to move the way they wish to, in fact, it would create greater chaos. I think the idea of a lockdown is to stop everyone where they are. I agree that it puts a lot of people to inconvenience. A lot of people would want to go back home. A lot of people would want to join their families. But the idea of a lockdown, it puts people to inconvenience, but that's the way to stop the spread of the virus. If you allow everyone to move from one corner to the other, you're actually facilitating the transfer of the spread of the virus, and then asking people to stay at home. I think it's actually could have led to a chaos. It's putting a lot of people to inconvenience.
Okay, Mayor Sharma, respond to that. There is some merit to what GVL is saying. If you tell everyone, and everyone goes back like it's Chhath Puja, then you take the virus from the cities to the rural areas where there is simply no capacity. In India, you have 1.5 beds per 1,000 people. In a state like Bihar, you have 0.5 beds per 1,000 people in the hospitals, and therefore if everyone lands up in Bihar from the cities, some of them are carrying coronavirus, that could be catastrophic. Therefore, there had to be an element of surprise, argues the government. Mayor.
I'm not sure that what we're talking about here is an element of surprise that was required. What you needed was to convince these people that they didn't need to go back home because they would be taken care of here, that there would be some source of income for them, whether from the government or otherwise, that there would be a place for them to stay and there would be a place for them to eat, all managed subject to the quarantine restrictions. Now, this is exactly what all the other countries that have imposed lockdowns are also having to deal with. They're trying to work out how to get money and basic subsistence to the people affected by it. We should have been thinking about that 3 weeks, a month ago. I did not hear a single discussion about it from the government or from Parliament.
Respond to that, GVL, that when you should have been prepping, you allowed for hydro chloroquine to be exported, you didn't import enough ventilators, you didn't augment capacity, the kind of effort that should have been made in the back end preparing for this, because this has been building from January in China and elsewhere, that preparation wasn't seen. Respond to Meher. Jivya.
No, I think these are very unfair accusations, and there are people who expect everything in a very perfect manner. And I think it should actually, one should strive for that. But in a situation of chaotic development, you cannot expect perfect solutions. I think what the government is looking at now is to ensure that people stay healthy, people don't catch the virus, people don't spread the virus, and that's the principal objective before the government. And most state governments and the central government this morning, government had announced that the cereals, rice and wheat would be supplied for the next 3 months at rupees 2 and rupees 3 a kg for rice and wheat. I think that will hardly cost 100 rupees per month for a family to survive on the basic staple food. I think that's a great help coming from the government that will be offered to nearly 80 crore people of the country. Most state governments have announced either free rations, even subsidizing that further, and handing out a small 1,000 rupees a month or 1,500 rupees a month to all the families, all the daily wage earners, all those the idea is to ensure that nobody goes without food.
Okay, Dr. Ratin Roy, what are your calculations showing you at this time? How much of an impact will this 21-day lockdown have on the Indian economy, and what's the best way of trying to minimize the kind of impact this will have on the Indian economic system?
Okay, I think I'll just take the last part of your question, because the impact is going to be for value of output, employment and GDP. All these are going to go south. By what magnitude we can control. So I think the helpful thing I can say is that what we need to focus on, and I've spoken on this at length, it's too short an interview. Number one, understand that the rules that apply now are rules that apply in a war-like economy. In a war-like economy, finance cannot be allowed to be a constraint. And I can commit to you as a fiscal economist, we will find the finance. We will find the finance in 72 hours, and we will find finance, we can easily find finance totaling to as much as 8% of GDP in 3 months. But we need to know what we are going to spend on, and we need to make sure that spending is effective. In a war-like economy, you must know what you want to buy. So in a war-like, in a peacetime economy, you'll say, do I have the money to buy a tank squadron? Do I have the money to buy an aircraft squadron? In a war-like economy, you say, I need a tank squadron or I need an aircraft squadron. You have to tell me what equipment you want. And then I will find the finances to spend on it. But if you've bought the wrong equipment in a war, and if you've misspent your money in this war, then the consequences of that for your economy are horrendous. And therefore, we have to make sure that we are able to spend the money effectively, and that means 3 things. One, we need to make sure that our supply chain is effective, and I've suggested there are many ways to do it. Remember, there are multiple supply chains, ranging from the Indian Army to Coca-Cola to the normal government supply chain. We need to harness all of these and make sure that the supplies which exist, Rahul. They exist in warehouses, they exist in factories, they exist in fields. Those supplies have to be moved to where they can be consumed to minimize the impact on GDP. And then we kickstart factories also slowly to make sure that they can ramp up production to keep supply chains moving. That is one very important thing we need to do. Okay. Then we need to make sure that either physically or through the delivery of income support, people are able to buy the things they want. Economies, GDP falls when people don't buy and sell things. We need to make sure that people are able to buy and sell things to the maximum extent possible. And the final thing we need to do in addressing this health crisis is understand that some things that we spend less on in peacetime, we are going to have to spend 3 or 4 times more in this pandemic. And the major thing there is our frontline medical personnel and paramedical personnel. I want to see these people mollycoddled from 6 in the morning till 6 the next morning. Sure. Their families must be fed and watered. They must be fed and watered. They must be transported in secure circumstances. They must be preserved, much like you will preserve fighter pilots in or frontline military personnel in a war, and that's what we do.
Okay, we preserve. I want to leave it over there. Dr. Ratin Roy, for joining us with your thoughts, as also Meher Sharma and Jivya Narasimha Rao. Thank you very much. 2 interesting approaches on whether this could have been done better, but given the scale of what's being done, there would have been problems. But you've heard different approaches on whether a more public build-up was better, or it could have probably been argued that it would have worsened the spread of the disease with more people heading back home. But Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.